Today we're going to talk about, as the title would indicate, patents meet nature. And I can't think of a better place, certainly in Arizona, to talk about that subject other than here. It's kind of a unique position right now in terms of where you are in your studies and research and where the law is in terms of its very narrowly defined interface of patents in relationship to technology that is either derived from or suggested by or inspired by or copied from nature. It's a very, very interesting interface. Let me give you just a really quick overview of where we're going to go in this next 40 or so minutes. We're going to start off by asking the question, where do patents actually intersect with nature? And that will give you a refocusing. If you know anything, if you knew anything before, it will refocus you. And if you didn't know anything before, you're very lucky, because then you won't have to be refocused. You'll just get a very simple set of rules to apply to evaluate innovative technology within your field and to determine whether or not that innovation rises to the level of patentable innovation. We'll talk about what patents are and what they do and why we have them. And we'll talk briefly in this process of what are the requirements for getting a patent. I'm going to emphasize a couple of those more than others because they affect the nature side of things. And then we'll take a look at some case studies, they're hypotheticals, in your field, and see how these general rules will allow you to tell the probability of whether you could get a patent or whether it might fall on the wrong side of nature, which can happen. So that's where we'll go and end up. This diagram will set the stage for everything else. If you look at it, the whole background is science, and you'll see two broad divisions, which are, of course, gross generalizations of physical science, which is physics and chemistry and all the engineering disciplines on that side. Some people call it hard science, whatever. Physical science is a pretty good term. And the other cluster is occupied by the natural sciences, whether it be biology or botany or zoology. Some call it the life sciences, as opposed to the hard sciences, for example. But we know what's in there. Of course, the really interesting little part of this diagram is the center part where these two overlap and where they become massively interdisciplinary in terms of technology, business, education. What you need to function in these areas is not like being a software engineer. It's not like being a chemist who's going to work on plastic, although that's more complex. You've really got to know a lot of different stuff. And that's where CBBG fits in terms of science. And what we're going to focus more on today is a subset of science called technology. This subset is definitionally a form of science that has been applied. Technology is applied science. It's applied to some specific end, to some specific problem. It is not the general accumulation of knowledge, the general discovery of principles of nature, which is the main thrust of research in general, but it's the applied applications, uses. And within that, there's another subset of technologies that are patentable technologies. These are not only useful technology, by definition they have to be, but they're new. That is to say, it's a form of technology that wasn't known before. And what does that mean, not known before? That means there's no evidence that anybody knew about what you're talking about before you started talking about it. Pretty severe standard, but it's a standard that is defined by evidence, and that evidence is usually another patent or a publication or someone who's used it in commerce. So newness is critical. When we talk in terms of nature, you've got to go back mentally to about 1980. I'm going to use that, certainly the 80s. The whole concept of nature and patents evolved on this side. It evolved in the physical sciences. It evolved that if you went out and found a new crystal or a new mineral that was in nature, and you picked that mineral up and looked at it, you couldn't get a patent on it. It may be new to you, and it may be new to everybody else in the world, but it wasn't new. Probably traces back to the Big Bang someplace. So you couldn't patent it. Pretty easy stuff, really. Pretty logical, pretty common sense. On the other side, in terms of methods and process, you couldn't, for example, get a patent on E equals MC squared, a theory. You couldn't get a patent on if you were Isaac Newton, you couldn't go out and claim a method for, a patentable method for causing an object to approach the Earth at an accelerating rate, where you claim that you have a method for lifting an object up, letting it go, and causing it to approach the Earth at 32 feet per second squared. Be nice, because then you would own all of mechanical engineering. You'd probably own 90% of all issued patents in the world if you could get that one. But again, it's a principle of nature, a phenomenon of nature, a rule of nature, a function of nature, all well established really in the last 200 years ago, for the most part, on the physical science side. And this side, natural science, in terms of patents, didn't really evolve until the 1980s in any meaningful way. Before the 1980s, we had two things in the little patent box. We had, from the 1930s, we had what are called plant patents. Those are patents on plants that are asexually reproduced, that are new, that have some particular use, and typically the most useful are ornamental uses, such as roses. The whole grafting of roses business in Glendale, Arizona was a huge business in the middle of the last century. But there's a lot of other things too. And then there's another subset, which is called the plant variety protection area, which are seed propagated, not asexually reproduced, not through grafting and other things, but seed propagated forms of botanical improvement. Those were subsets. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the same kind of patent that you would get on a device or anything else. So 1980 comes along, and we have a Supreme Court decision. Inventor's name and the case name is Chakrabarty, an Indian researcher who was working for GE at the time, who genetically modified, this is very early on in terms of genetic modification, who genetically modified a microbe so that it would take on the wonderful characteristic of digesting crude oil and excreting waste products that were biodegradable. Now, if you think of the Alaska spill or any oil spill, you'll see that this is a moderately worthwhile and useful invention. And he was opposed all the way through the process by the patent office, saying one thing: you cannot patent a living thing. That's where we were in 1980. You cannot patent a living thing. Well, long story short, Supreme Court said, oh, yes, you can. The Supreme Court said, you can patent anything new under the sun made by man probably an overstatement, but you get the drift. He said that this is new. This microbe did not exist in nature. It did not exist until Mr. Chakrabarty came along and made it exist. So it's new. And it is highly useful. Those are two critical things for a patent. So that's where we are in 1980. Okay, let's move ahead to 2013. And we're at the other end of a historical span. And we have a company by the name of Myriad Genomics or something like that, Myriad we'll call them, who were their researchers were the first ones to identify the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes, which are found on the 13 and 17 chromosomes, identified them, where they are, how to find them, and it was pretty well known kind of what they did, but if they ever mutated, that was a prime indicator of a propensity, a predisposition of that patient to contract breast or ovarian cancer. So it's a wonderful diagnostic tool. That's the good news. The bad news is the patent attorneys claim the roughly 80,000 base pairs that made up the BRCA1 and separately the BRCA2 gene, and claimed that in a patent, which issued, and they started to enforce against everybody who was going to do diagnostics in this area. And then they were challenged in a subsequent thing, went to the Supreme Court, long story short. I gotta tell you though, between those times, there was between 6,000 and 10,000 patents issued on genes or long series of base pairs. These are issued patents. A lot of people investing a lot of money. Supreme Court said you can't patent a gene sequence. Why? For the same reason you can't patent the mineral you find in nature. It's already there. What you're doing is you're discovering something in nature that existed. You are the discoverer. You get to write the paper. You get the glory. You get a favorable review when it comes to becoming tenured. You may get a better job because of it. You may get a pay raise, but you ain't going to get a patent. You were a discoverer, which is extraordinarily important. It is really the focus of this kind of background research, but not the focus of technology, and certainly not the focus of patents. So the fact that they snipped this out, isolated this, I think some of them are around 80,000 base pairs, nucleotides long thing, and said, here's where it is, that took a huge effort at that time. This goes back 10, 15 years. That's a huge effort. But the Supreme Court said, the amount you sweat does not count toward inventorship. Your effort doesn't count. It could just be by sheer luck that you come up with an invention. And you still get a patent, but not if your luck was searching it out to find out how nature solved the problem, as opposed to you. So there we've got our basic outline of where we are, and we can go on. I'm going to move ahead to just a couple of things. I'm not going to talk about that. You can look at it later. Some of the economics of patents. If you have a patent, you have a form of property. You are the only person who can make, use, or sell what is described in the patent. The federal government says that. We are going to give you this patent. That means you own the rights, but you only own them for a limited time. And after that limited time, anybody can use it. That limited time is typically 20 years from the time you filed an application to have the patent issued. So if you look at what the incentive system is here, and it's a very important thing economically, patents are intended to induce you to create But that's true of all research, really. You're induced by the success of the process of reaching a conclusion or reaching a finding or having a discovery. That's an inducement. But this is a little bit different. This is not to find, not to discover. This is to create. Remember, the difference between invention and discovery is that discovery is the result of searching. Invention is the result of mental conception of an idea. Very important difference. It also encourages you to develop your idea, your concept, to build it, because if you want to get a patent, you have to either build it physically and test it physically to show that it works, or you have to have written a paper or prepared a document that has enough detail in it that a person of ordinary skill in your field would be able to build it. With some help, perhaps, but could build it. That's advancing. You can see here, this is an intellectual thing, creation. Development is getting down to where we're talking about physical embodiment of concepts. The third thing is, to get a patent, you as a requirement, you have to publish. Now, it's not in a journal. We'll talk at the end here about where all this stuff is and how wonderfully accessible this is. You can sit here today and pull up patents. We'll give you a list of 100, the most recently issued 100 patents on soil conditioning. And you can take this one PDF and click on it, and lo and behold, it'll pop up the website and show you the patent, and you can read it and see what that is and who owns it and who invented it and what the dates were on it. An enormous resource, and that is one of the purposes of the patent system. And finally, it's to encourage people, when they do have a good idea that is developed and is published and is useful, you have the exclusive right then to commercialize it or to permit other people to commercialize it. And that's the pure financial incentive that we look at. There are two different categories of invention for our purposes. There are words all over the place in lawsuits among attorneys that, and in the old statute that dates back to the 1790s, words that really don't even apply in our language anymore. But what I can tell you for a certainty is all inventions fall into one of these two categories. They're either a thing, with a capital T, or they are a method either for making things or a method for using things. That's the category that all inventions fall into. That's important to keep in mind when we talk about nature, because nature falls into almost the same category. The invention must also be new. We've talked about that. It has to be useful. We've talked about that. The third is it can't be obvious. If you just make a small incremental change that any well-informed engineer would say, oh, let's do it this way instead of that way, that's not invention. It has to be deemed to be non-obvious to persons of ordinary skill in your area. And lastly, it has to be described in a published form. That is to say, when you get a patent, you have to give up all your trade secrets. You can't hold back that one key material that is really the thing that's going to make the light bulb light up. You've got to show it all. Otherwise, your patent would be invalid. So, let's talk about a few hypotheticals here and see how we go. And these are taken from this continuum between Chakrabarty in 1980 and Myriad in 2013. So here's our first hypothetical. We have invented, or we have designed, or we have discovered a newly discovered and extremely rare organic compound that is found in subsoils in tropical rainforests. It's a very strange and very rare material. Could we get a patent on that composition? Yes, hands up. No, hands down. Okay. No's have it. Why? Same reason. The compound is rare. We've gone all these years of mankind without ever knowing about it. Nobody else knew about it, but we didn't create it. We did not create the compound. We found the compound. We discovered we didn't invent it. Okay, shorthand. Second question, what if we figure that we get a dilute spray of this stuff and we spray it on dusty surfaces and it forms kind of a weakened bond between dust particles. It's not great, but it's not bad. You have a very high wind, it'll blow away this little crust. If you walk on it, it'll break up the crust, kind of like it does in the desert. But it's nice stuff. Well, that's useful. But can I get a patent on it? How many say yes? How many say no? That's even. That's even. Why do you say no?
Same process. We're patenting the compound is not actually same as number one.
We're diluting it.
You're patenting the method of making the dust going away. Right?
No, the method is not there though. That's just the compound.
Tricky. This is how we do in law school. We give trick questions.
You can patent the method, not the compound.
Yeah.
Say again?
The method, not the compound.
Absolutely. The method of what? What method?
Of reducing dust. The method of reducing dust.
The title would be a method for distributing a particular compound on a dusty surface for the use of inhibiting motion of particles, maybe something like that. Okay. So remember, previous slide said we can patent things. We can't patent this thing, but we sure can patent the method for using the thing. I guarantee you, in a tropical rainforest, you don't have dust problems. Okay, so it wasn't something that nature was doing like the genes were doing in terms of controlling cancer. It was done for a different purpose. So there we got it. Get the use patent, but not the product. Could there be a patent on a method for using the compound to stabilize dusty surfaces? We just covered that. The answer is clearly yes. What about a synthesized form of the compound? Could I claim a synthesized form? How many say, yeah, you can claim a synthesized form? How many say you can't? Why not?
It's the same thing. There's nothing new.
That's right. It's the same trick. Could I get a patent on a method to synthesize the compound? Maybe yes, maybe no. What would I have to know to say yes? Is the synthesis process new? Not the compound. Is the synthesis process new? And it's not obvious in view of other similar synthesis processes. Okay? You know, I may obviously, I'm doing a different compound, I'm going to have to use a slightly different method than I would use to form some other compound. But is it within the range of obvious variation? If it is within that range, then I can't get a patent on the process for synthesis. If it is within that range, vice versa. If it isn't obvious, I could get a patent. Let's continue this one. Same problem. The question is, could I get a method on a patent for method of synthesis? Yes, subject to the conditions. What patents might be available if it was discovered that mixing the compound with a small amount of photosensitive resin before we applied it, we could apply this to the dusty surface and it would produce kind of a porous skin of bound particles, but they would really only harden up after they were exposed to UV for a period of time, maybe a week or 2 or 3, depending on where you were. What kind of patents might I look at? Would the compound be patentable? We've already decided that, no. What about the compound in combination with this particular photosensitive resin? Could that be patentable? Can we say yes? I think we agree on that one. Could be, might be obvious, not obvious to make that combination. And certainly the method for application and dust control or inhibition of dust movement would be one of those that could be patented. Any questions on that one?
When you said obvious,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
you said obvious or not obvious.
Well,
Who decided of how obvious it is when, you know, when you look at something already, oh, that was obvious, but you didn't think about it.
it's a funny, it's probably the single hardest definition to apply in patent law, but I don't find it very difficult. Here's the rule. It has to be non-obvious to a person of ordinary skill in the area that you're working in, okay? So if you're working in a group that's all PhDs, all heavy researchers, you've got a different standard than if you're working on the development of a new spade to dig a trench to put an irrigation line in. That's a different world. So you have different levels of obviousness. And it's a very difficult thing. The best way to do it is you look at something, you look at our little dust inhibitors. There's been a lot of people looking for that for a long time. And if I did take this compound and I did combine it with this resin and it did UV set, I know I can make money. I know I can make a lot of money. And that would motivate anybody of ordinary skill to do the same thing. It would be obvious then to make the money that way. That's kind of a farmer's approach to making a determination of obviousness. It's really simple because we're working in an economic system. And you can look at it and say, is this going to make money or is it going to make a lot of money? Don't ask the question, can I get a patent on this? Because remember, 80% of patents are never commercialized. Isn't that startling? And of the 80% that are commercialized, 80% more really don't make more money than is spent on getting them. Certainly if you throw in the R&D behind them. So you've got to be particular here. With the patent, your goal is not glory through publication. It's glory through finance. That's where you want to end up for you or for your institution. So let's take a new look here. We've covered that, might be available. Let's go to the next one. Here's one. This is a Chakrabarty, okay? This is a naturally occurring microbe found to digest crude. Naturally occurring. Can we get a patent on it? Yes or no? On the microbe? Let me just tell you, if I asked this question 4 years ago to a group of 1,000 patent lawyers, everybody would have said yes. And they would have said yes clear back to 1980. There's been 35 years of confusion because people get away from the basic rules. They think, well, this is a new technology. We can judge this different. We're different from everybody else. We saw it in this huge family of patents that issued on computer program implemented methods. People would get any kind of method for doing a business and computer implement it and call it non-obvious. Well, the computer implementation didn't exist, but it's just taking standard engineering techniques and applying them to a particular business. So they can be held to be obvious in that sense. This gets pretty easy. What about if I went in, looked at the microbe, did a bunch of analysis, and I discovered, not the microbe, but I discovered how chemically the digestive process worked. Could I get a method patent on how to synthetically, that is without a microbe, synthetically convert crude oil into biodegradable waste? How many say I could? Some weak yeses. How many say no? Well, the yeses have it and the rest are indeterminate. What's your reasoning? Any yes person? What's the reasoning behind it?
Method of synthesizing. It's the method for synthesizing or stimulating chemical reaction.
Yeah.
Old technology.
Exactly. exactly, exactly. And we're misled by saying that, well, all we're doing is, this is pretty close here. We're mimicking, which is as close as you get without crossing the line, by the way. We're mimicking what is really a natural process.
But how it's phrased there, it would not be.
Say again?
How it is phrased, the chemical reaction on itself cannot be affected.
Well, if I could go in and find exactly the same, if I found out that if I had sodium and chloride and I put them in water and they formed some kind of a sodium chloride thing, I couldn't patent that, could I? Why can't I patent this?
Because it's a method.
Well, you can argue, that it's the same method that is carried out by the microbe. The microbe is doing the same method within its body. It's a tough one. It is right on the line, and you could fight this one about 3 different ways on it. My feeling is you'll probably get it because I can almost guarantee you that you're only going to be inspired by the natural process by the time you scale up. Remember how much of this stuff we're going to have to produce to take care of an oil spill. We're going to need a lot of this stuff. By the time you scale up to an industrial dimension, I think you're going to have a patentable invention. But at the line, it's a very tricky little question. And then could there be a patent if the microbe was genetically modified to double its natural rate of digestion, and you know that would be possible. That is jeopardy. And this one is if the research that you were doing led to a new tool for quickly and reliably editing the microbe's DNA. And that's the CRISPR-Cas9 problem. If you can come up with that, holy cow, are you going to have something, especially if it's like the CRISPR, that you can accurately trim out long sequences and either modify them or replace them. That's a tool that is roughly the equivalent in electronics of a transistor as an invention, and maybe even a microcircuit. It's a big deal that's going to open science up way down the road. So that one's kind of tricky, not too bad. Now we don't have anything here. You know, how are we doing for time?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So what if we find a method that has nothing to do with genetically engineering to get the microbe to do the digestion faster? Maybe a method to get the microbe to do the digestion faster. Let's say maybe change the pH or change the salinity or do something that will get the microbe to work better.
I think that's patentable. It falls clearly on the other line. Unless someone could come and say, well, we knew that if we took a handful of these microbes and put it over in a slightly more acidic environment, it would increase the rate of digestion. We knew that.
We knew that, or is it published? Like we knew, how do you prove that they knew it? Really?
Just exactly what it's going to be in a prior patent, it's going to be in a publication, or there's a third way. And you could go out into industry and say, yeah, hell, we didn't publish that. We do that all the time. We've got oil spills. We always throw in a couple gallons of acid on the spill and, let it stir up a little bit. And boy, when they get that little bit more acidic, they really crank out the stuff. It's evidence. Can you prove it or not?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So a patent, I guess the few true tests of a patent, how often?
The what?
A true test for a patent is a challenge to a patent, for example, maybe. In my mind, you can come back and challenge a patent, you actually learn something new. So, considering that microbial DNA or microbial genome is very plastic, I'm kind of confused how Chuck Barter got the patent. What if he got an 80? What if in 82 someone said, you know what? This microbe in this environment all of a sudden doubled it on its own because it adapts to its environment, which
critically important question. And the way you phrased it gives a very clear answer. Inventions are evaluated solely at the time the patent application is filed and not after. Hindsight is the greatest teacher in the world. Once you know how an invention is made, it is always obvious. to a person of skill in the technology, always. And that is plain old psychology, and the law is taking care of that by cementing this time at the time you filed your patent application. What came later is irrelevant. It's not even admissible as evidence.
Can you challenge that patent then based on
Not on that ground.
all that's happening naturally?
No. Oh, say again then?
The same microbe on its own may adapt to that environment and double, triple clone rate in some other countries, some other part of the world on its own. Similar strain with some minor genetic variation, but naturally occurring variation. You come back and challenge that patent and say, well,
When did it occur? Fair question. When did it occur? Before or after the date of application? It's not admissible. We have a time bar. That's it. We put blinders on. You can only look backwards from that date. You can't look forward.
I think what you're saying is it happened always, but it wasn't discovered.
Yes. That's very much like what we talked about before, the microbes in a slightly different pH. And that we know pH varies in nature quite a bit. But we just didn't happen to hit that pocket when we found it. If you could prove that, if you could prove 3 years after, 10 years after this patent issued, you could say, here it's been well known to have these pH variations in these different locations. You can certainly prove that today, but unless those variations were documented before, it's probably not going to get admitted. And this is going to probably stay as valid, yeah.
We got everyone question.
I'm sorry,
Yeah, sorry. So mine kind of goes back to the first case.
the dust case.
Yeah. So suppose the microbe that you found is incredibly rare and not many people know about it, or you've just discovered it yourself.
That was
So-
in the fact pattern, that
Right.
it was extremely rare, and it was found in the subsoil in tropical rainforest.
Right. So you said that if you were to try and patent a method for synthesizing this microbe, or it was only patentable if it wasn't obvious, if the method for synthesizing it wasn't
That's right.
obvious. So if this microbe is unknown at the time,
Yes.
and you said that
Yes.
it's evaluated at the time,
Yes.
then would any method for synthesizing an unknown microbe be obvious to anybody?
I don't have enough facts, but if this is part of a group of organic compounds that have been synthesized in the past by 7 well-known techniques, and I pick the closest technique and I tweak it just a little bit and then I synthesize it, then that process of synthesis would be obvious. I'm just using one of 7 tools I could use. Let's see, I've got a Phillips head, I've got a star head, I've got a flat screwdriver, flat screw, I'm going to use this one. Okay? It's an obvious choice. A little bit simplified over your facts, but you get it, right? Okay. Any other ones? So, where are we here? This is a no-brainer. A newly discovered mineral found in a tailing pond, maybe it's a little bit tricky, at an abandoned copper mine. So you're out doing some studies at a copper mine and you see these big tailing ponds where all the crud left over after they've processed initially is in this pile, and you're digging around there for samples, and down at the bottom you find this mineral that is really cool looking. Got little crystalline forms around it and everything else. You've never seen it. You take it to all your buddies at the university. They've never seen it. Can I get a patent on it? How many say no? How many say yes? How many say maybe?
Still maybe.
One maybe.
No and maybe.
Huh?
I said no and maybe, so just
No and maybe.
There you
Okay. Well, there's a trick here.
You can create conditions that are unusual.
Say again.
You could have created conditions that would have not have occurred
I
naturally.
didn't create anything. I was out there with my shovel, okay? And I found this stuff. The funny thing here is I didn't find it in nature. I will tell you, tailing ponds are not naturally occurring deposits, okay? They're crud. So that's a big deal when you're over talking about plants, by the way. A plant found in nature can't be patented. But a plant found in a cultivated field, a cotton field, if it's new, could be patented because it's not found in nature, it's found in a cultivated environment. This is an uncultivated environment, but it's not a natural environment. So what we've been talking about, the answer is it's not barred because of nature, but I've just got this little thing in my hand and it doesn't, go ahead.
And so for the plant case, it's not the plant, but the method to cultivate.
No, actually, it's the plant.
The plant.
You actually are patenting the plant, whether it is asexually reproduced or seed propagated. So it really is a subset of everything we're talking about. Separate statutes, separate rules, separate line of history. We've got another problem here. Go ahead.
So does that mean that if we find a microbe in a wastewater treatment plant, we can patent it because the wastewater treatment plant is not nature?
Maybe, but
Because
I'd want to know if it was in there digesting stuff and making it biodegradable. I would say maybe not, maybe so. It's a hard call. It's a hard call. That may be, that's not a pure found in nature, but it is an element, that microbe is an element of an evolutionary process. And in fact, many microbes are tested by that same method. Put them in a cruddy environment and see which ones do the best. So maybe yes, maybe no. If it was you that was doing this selection process and testing them out, you didn't modify the microbe. So I would say I wouldn't spend my money on getting a patent on the microbe. But if that microbe did something for me, I'd get a patent on the use. And if anybody wants to go out and make microbes, fine. You can't sell them for any purpose other than my use. So I've controlled the market anyhow without getting fixated on the real problem. Yeah.
If this is the argument, you could argue that anything on the earth at this moment is influenced by the presence of human beings. So then any new discovery would be patentable.
Would be or wouldn't be?
Would be. Because there's no nature on earth anymore existing.
it's a pristine environment, I know, right?
Yeah, that's the definition.
Well, if you talk to a microbe, if you interview a few million microbes, they'll tell you that there is nothing consistent. Everything is a variable. Nature is a variable. So I don't know.
Or everything is nature and human are parts of it, or nothing.
So if you want to get a patent, take one position. If you don't want a patent, take the other position. So just you have to be useful. You have to have some use.
So back to this case.
Yeah.
So what if the mineral that you found is not completely new, but it's like some variation of an already known mineral? Could it be patentable?
Well, if it's a new variation, it's not, and it's certainly not found in nature as far as I can see. I can't see that here in these facts. If it's a variation, it's a variation. And a variation, everything's a variation, right? Remember this rule. Every invention that has ever been patented is made up of old parts. So a new chemical compound is made up of old chemicals. Okay, yeah.
Then also with that, like where is the line drawn for if there's like, here's a new method to do X, but like how different does it have to be than something that's not obvious and already established? That's still patentable. So like,
You said it. It has to not be obvious to a person of ordinary skill working in that technology. That is the legal standard. Hard to apply? Yes. Easy to say? Yes. A quick way to evaluate it, just look at the dollars. If it's something that you are involved in an area and you can see a need out here, and you can see something that's going to modify human behavior in some beneficial way, and you know that people have been looking at, that's a very important one. Have people been looking for it for a long time? That's a pretty good indication. If something's commercially valuable and people have been looking for it, I can almost tell you without more evidence that it's going to be patentable. It's going to be not obvious. Okay. Yeah.
Might be a little bit off topic, but who decides this? Like, this goes to like the court, and a court takes specialists in the area?
What you do is you have your invention, you have already made it, or you've described it in such a way as it can be made. You then prepare a patent application, which is like a regular publication without footnotes, but it has as its focus not enriching human knowledge necessarily, but telling people how to make and use this thing. It's a cookbook. You prepare that document, you give it to the patent office. The patent office is occupied by about 2,000 examiners who are broken up into all these groups. Some are mechanical engineers, some are aeronautics, some are electrical, some are software. some are in your area, and those people get it and they review it. And of course, to them, everything's obvious because they've seen the most current stuff possible. So they have to apply a fairly objective standard. They look at it and they say it's obvious, and then you come back and argue with them and say, well, if it was so obvious, Mr. Examiner, how come you're making $60,000 a year and I'm worth $4 million? I mean, proof is in the pudding, right? You argue, and then he either gives up or you give up. And if you give up, you can appeal it to a higher court, but ultimately the patent will issue. And then you have the exclusive rights. You can go out and sue someone for using that, and then those people can challenge it. Subject to the rules we've talked about introducing evidence after the date of invention. Okay? So that's how it is. In the first instance, the patent office makes the decision in negotiation with the patent applicant, the inventor, or the company. And then after that, it can always be tested in the courts. Okay, let's see what else we got here. That one we've talked about. Here's our last one. This is a good one. So you've got a slurry, a naturally occurring slurry. You've got calcium carbonate and calcium sulfate mixed in. And this has been around for a long time. You see it at various sites. But you take it back to the lab and you find out that if you slightly lower its pH and then pulse it in a container, you pulse it with pressure, it will turn from a slurry to kind of a soft, firm, not quite a solid, but like something that's a tightly packed. It would crumble, but it's tightly packed. Can I get any kind of patents on that thing?
The method.
What method?
Lowering the pH
And a method is determined by steps. Step one, providing the slurry that has X% of this and Y% of that, and Z% of water. And then you say, modifying the pH in the range between this and that. And then you say, subjecting that to pulse of X in the PSI range between this pressure and that pressure per square inch. And of course, this is the one that is when you're fracking and you don't want to have a follow-up earthquake, would be the nice guy to have because your equipment's already out there. You're about to take the equipment down, you're done fracking, and you've broken up some of this stuff and you've got cracks in it, and you're in southern Oklahoma where they're having, 2 or 3 earthquakes a day, I think, something like that. I think there's maybe 5 or 6 threes or 3 pluses a week. It's some crazy number. You've got the equipment out there, pump the stuff back in and pulse it. You've got huge pressures out there. You could just pulse the hell out of it. So a method for doing it would be the right thing. The slurry couldn't be patented. There's no question about that. You might have a method for making the slurry, but I doubt it. It seems too simple mixture of things. Here's a list that is available here. Dr. Larson has it. You can get it. It's, I think, 3 pages long. I just put this together. It's 100 pages, 100 patents, the latest ones, the most recent on the top, and then the third page is the least recent, relating to soil conditioning. If you have this document, it's a PDF, you can get it by email. You can go in and click here, and it will take you to a site where you will have a digital version of the patent. Up at the top center, there'll be a little button that says Images. You can click on that button, and it will take you to the actual document with all the drawings, if there are. A lot of these don't have drawings, but it will take you to that document, and it will show you who the inventor is, what institution owns it, when it was filed, all the information, and you can read about the problem that was solved and how they did it. You can't get this in regular research. You can get a lot of high-level knowledge and theory, but you can't get the down-to-earth practice, which in this world is part of the overlapping circles between the natural science and the physical science. So it's a nice little tool there's a way to do this for any subject, by the way, just about any subject. You can do a collection like this for yourself. So, yeah, I'm sorry.
So are these submitted patents or are they?
These are all issued. These are all issued patents right here. There is another file. Whenever you file a patent application, if you're not going to file in foreign countries, you can elect to have it secret. If you don't elect to have it secret, it will be published within 18 months. And there's a separate list of those. They're not issued, but they're pending. And that's a good way to peek over the shoulder of a competitor or another institution, see what they're doing. And by the way, you can go on, and if you want to know about those guys at UC Davis and what they're doing and they're not telling you about, you can go in and put the university name in and put in the subject matter. If you want to do it, there's a class just for soil treatment, and get a printout of everything they have filed that has been published or everything that is issued to them.
Let's click on that.
Any questions?
But issued means they're accepted by the first round of endorsement.
Well, they've made it through the patent office.
Yeah.
The federal government has granted them. You get a document with a ribbon on it and a gold seal and stuff like this. It means you have now a ticket to the federal court. If somebody else is using your invention, you can go out, stop them, or if you don't want to litigate, you can license them to use your product, and they can pay you a royalty. Got it?
So I'm sorry, one more questions.
Yeah, we're just gonna.
We started this the wrong way, so just show of hands. We didn't actually introduce Mr. Sutton.
That doesn't matter.
So just a quick background from what I remember. Over 35 years as a patent attorney, taught here at NSU. Fortunate himself by getting a physics degree at one point and several other degrees. I believe I can't remember. Very active in the legal community. He's a very avid hiker. My understanding is you've been pretty much on every continent in the U.S. or in the world many times.
Not Antarctica.
Not okay, just Antarctica. Okay, everywhere else. So I do apologize for that. I should have introduced you up front, but
It's the least important part of this.
we had a very good Q&A during the session, but this is the actual, this is our official time for questions. So please ask away, and the other universities as well.
All the universities.
Oh, we might want
We'll open the questions for all the universities.
Yeah, we have other universities online, and actually.
Anybody,
And you see Davis heard what you said.
I think they hung up.
is there any way to,
I think
mute them or something?
they kind of need. Okay.
Do you have any questions for our university? I think Davis is probably a four continents at this
I
time.
think so, yeah.
How about here in the room? Any questions for Mr. Sutton?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, plants being patented, have animals being patented?
Animals. Yes, Dolly the sheep. And the Chinese have filed on their two monkeys. Problem. Dolly the sheep has been litigated. Remember, Dolly is a clone. The patent, as it relates to the process of cloning, is going to stand. The patent on the clone can't stand. Why? It's by definition identical to the parents' sheep.
Clone.
What I was thinking about it was more of puppies and kittens being selected for things like that. People
Look, we have done that now. Man has done that now for about 2,000, 3,000, look, pre-Egyptian, okay? Babylonians were breeding dogs for particular applications. Now we're coming to the point where we could do that in terms of pets, and humans and livestock. Of course, we've done it. That's a very good point. Livestock has been bred for years and years and years. That's selective breeding. That's kind of like asexual reproduction of plants. That's a form of specialty breeding. I like the white rose and I like the red rose, but I wish I had a pink rose. And so I graft this one onto that one. Same with oranges. Citrus is always grafted that way. So yeah, we have two laws on the books that of two areas you can't get a patent. It's the only ones I know of. One is you can't get a patent on an atomic weapon, a nuclear weapon, okay, big or small. And the second one is you can't get a patent on a human being. There's a statute that says that. And so Congress, at least, was thinking about your question and said, well, we can do cats and dogs and mice or what the Chinese are doing are laboratory monkeys, actually, for brain research, which is, if any PETA members in here, you won't be too happy with that one. They don't have a strong chapter in Beijing, however, but it's going to be pretty tough when that happens. But those, again, the process for cloning could be patented, but the clones cannot be because they're old. Not found in nature, they're old. Other question? Yeah.
Yeah, so it is quite an investment to start the whole big procedure.
Yeah, I didn't hear the first part.
Quite an investment. So when do you decide? And of course, if you see the obvious $4 million, you try to patent. But I have also some experience that people who patent just for the marketing aspect. Just file a patent, say I'm patenting technology, which helps you.
It's an economic decision, and sometimes they file the patent knowing that it will never issue, but so that they can put patent pending on their product or on the method, or to tell potential licensees they have one. Now, if it doesn't publish in 18 months, no one's going to know that you're faking until ever, because the patent's not going to issue and it's never going to get published, and so you can fake it for a good period of time, except against a sophisticated purchaser.
But at least if it's an issue, it's going to be a publication, so other people.
Maybe not. No, remember, it'll publish in 18 months unless you elect not to have it published. You can stop that process. And a lot of companies are doing that. You have to have it published if you're going to file outside the U.S. There's a treaty provision that controls that. But if you're not going to do that, you probably are better off not having it published because you don't want to give your competitor a head start in your area.
Or you could say that it's published and other ones cannot publish anymore because it's not new anymore.
Oh, no. The publication is after the key date. Okay. Nothing happened after the key date counts. Other questions? Got it?
More questions? Yeah, one more back there.
I just have a comment, and Sam, thank you so much for preparing all of these examples that's all related to our topics. I think that was absolutely amazing. And we welcome you to our CBG family, you know, the of Dr. Larson here. And so we're very proud of her and really appreciate your help.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to be
That's
here.
absolutely wonderful.
It's really interesting because it is a topic that is extremely current in your field and really relevant to the field. But I think with the basic, I mean, people are answering the right questions. That's all the tools you need to make an early determination of whether it's worth going ahead with or not. So, good. Thank you, guys.
We're going to make this PowerPoint available. The 100 top are current examples. I fished through a few of them. Super interesting. Many of you have talked about this in your meeting, some of the top 100 patents. Really surprising how our thinking is very much in line with others around the world about what can and can't be done. So pretty interesting stuff. And I encourage you all to at least click through one of those, two of those projects or the patents in the top 100. I can tell you, as someone who's currently fighting a patent reviewer, it's very subjective to our opinion on what a reviewer believes is obvious. So I don't think it's obvious, but he or she thinks it's pretty obvious.
I've never seen an inventor that said his invention is obvious.
Exactly. Thank you once again. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.